Imagine living in a neighborhood where you can't even park in your own driveway because of one person. Meet Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, who decides that cars and driveways are visual clutter and bans them altogether. But when the neighborhood fights back with creative protests and one explosive HOA showdown, Karen learns the hard way that controlling a community is easier said than done. Stick around to see how far Karen will go to enforce her ridiculous rule and how her own hypocrisy leads to her downfall. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below if you've ever dealt with an over-the-top HOA. Your support helps us bring more wild stories to life. Maplewood Grove was the kind of suburban neighborhood people dreamed about. Well-kept lawns, friendly neighbors, and the simple pleasure of pulling into your driveway after a long day. For Daniel, it was the perfect place to settle down. The streets were quiet, the neighbors polite, and life had a comforting rhythm. That was until Karen became HOA president. Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She was the type who believed rules were sacred texts. She was the chosen interpreter. Armed with her ever-present clipboard and an air of superiority, Karen treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. But even Daniel wasn't prepared for what she pulled next. It started with a letter. A crisp white envelope tucked neatly into every mailbox in the neighborhood. Daniel opened his as he returned from work, the bold header immediately catching his eye. Notice of new HOA regulation, driveway parking prohibited. His brow furrowed as he read the contents. Effective immediately, all residents are prohibited from parking vehicles in their driveways. All vehicles must be stored inside garages to maintain community aesthetics and property value. Violators will be subject to fines of $100 per day. Karen, HOA president. Daniel stared at the letter in disbelief. No parking in your own driveway. Was this a joke? He glanced outside, where his car sat peacefully in the driveway, just like it had for months, just like everyone's car did. There was no problem, until Karen decided there was. The next day, the neighborhood buzzed with confusion and frustration. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, clutching identical letters, their faces a mix of disbelief and annoyance. I have 3 kids. Where am I supposed to put the bikes, tools, and everything else in my garage? Linda, Daniel's next-door neighbor, vented. Not everyone has an empty garage just waiting for a car. It's ridiculous, added Mike, a car enthusiast who proudly displayed his vintage Mustang in his driveway. That car doesn't belong in a cramped garage. It's a showpiece. Despite the growing outrage, Karen stood firm. At the next HOA meeting, she addressed the crowd with her signature smug smile. Parking vehicles in driveways disrupts the visual harmony of our neighborhood, she announced, flipping through her clipboard as if it contained the meaning of life. Garages are for cars, not storage. This rule is final. When Daniel raised his hand, Karen barely glanced at him. Questions will be limited to 2 per person. We don't have time for unnecessary debates. But wasn't this supposed to be a community decision? Daniel pressed. When was the vote? Karen's smile tightened. As HOA president, I have the authority to enact emergency aesthetic regulations without a formal vote. Emergency? Mike scoffed from the back. What's the emergency? That my car is too shiny. Laughter rippled through the room, but Karen wasn't amused. Order. This rule is for the greater good of Maplewood Grove. If you can't comply, expect fines. And just like that, it was official. No vote. No discussion. Just one woman's obsession with aesthetics becoming law. As the meeting adjourned, Daniel exchanged looks with his frustrated neighbors. He knew one thing for sure. Karen had just picked the wrong fight. The days following Karen's new parking rule felt like a bizarre social experiment. Driveways sat eerily empty, while garages overflowed with hastily crammed vehicles, bikes, tools, and whatever else had to be shoved aside to make space. Daniel's car, once parked comfortably in his driveway, was now awkwardly squeezed into his cluttered garage, forcing him to climb out like a contortionist just to avoid denting the door. But what really lit the spark wasn't the inconvenience, it was Karen's patrols. Armed with her ever-present clipboard and a smartphone, Karen strutted through the neighborhood like she was on a mission from the HOA gods. She'd snap photos of violations, leaving bright yellow notices taped to garage doors and mailboxes like unwanted trophies. Mike's vintage Mustang became her first target. It was parked in his driveway, shining proudly under the afternoon sun. Daniel watched from his porch as Karen approached it, her face scrunched in disapproval. She pulled out her phone, snapped several photos, and slapped a violation notice right on the windshield. Mike stormed out moments later, the crumpled notice in his fist. "Are you serious, Karen?" he barked. "This car is older than half the houses here. It's a classic, not an eyesore." Karen didn't flinch. "Rules are rules, Mike. If you don't like them, perhaps you should consider finding a community that shares your aesthetic values." That was the moment the neighborhood snapped. The next evening, Daniel gathered with Mike, Linda, and a dozen other fed-up neighbors in his garage, ironically, the very place Karen wanted their cars. "This isn't just about parking," Daniel said. "It's about control. She didn't ask for our input. She's treating us like kids who can't make decisions about our own homes." The group agreed. Something had to be done. The first phase of rebellion was creative compliance. Mike parked his Mustang on his lawn, claiming, well, she didn't say anything about grass. Linda technically followed the rule by leaving her garage door open 24/7, showcasing her cluttered mess to the entire neighborhood. Daniel parked his car in his garage but left his driveway covered with absurd items: lawn chairs, traffic cones, even an inflatable flamingo. Other neighbors joined in. Driveways filled with giant inflatable dinosaurs, cardboard cutouts of cars, and even a full-sized plastic boat someone dragged out of storage. The neighborhood looked like a bizarre art exhibit dedicated to petty defiance. Karen was livid. She doubled down, issuing more fines, calling emergency HOA meetings, and even threatening to tow cars parked improperly. But instead of intimidating the residents, it united them. Group chats buzzed with updates on Karen's latest tantrums, and people who had never spoken before were now bonding over a shared enemy. Daniel realized something powerful. Karen might have authority, but the community had something stronger: each other. And this was just the beginning. Karen's war on driveway parking had turned Maplewood Grove into a battleground of passive-aggressive defiance. Inflatable flamingos, plastic boats, and even a giant cardboard cutout of a sports car decorated the once orderly driveways. But for Karen, none of it was funny. She saw the rebellion not as neighborhood unity, but as a direct threat to her authority, and she was determined to crush it. The breaking point came when she targeted Mike's vintage Mustang again. One morning, Daniel awoke to shouting outside. He rushed to his window and saw Mike, red-faced with fury, arguing with a tow truck driver who was attempting to hook up his prized car. Daniel sprinted outside, followed by several neighbors. "What's going on?" he demanded. Mike's voice trembled with rage. "Karen had my car towed. She said it's in violation of the parking rule, even though it's parked in my own driveway." Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, her signature clipboard clutched tightly. "The rules are clear," she snapped. "Driveways are not designated parking areas. I warned you." The crowd erupted. "You can't tow someone's car from their own property." Linda shouted. "Where in the bylaws does it say that?" Another neighbor demanded. Karen smirked. "It's in the fine print. I'm simply enforcing community standards." That was the final straw. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "You've crossed the line, Karen. This isn't about the neighborhood anymore. It's about your ego." The tow truck driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the growing crowd. "Look, lady," he said to Karen, "I don't think this is legal. I'm not risking my job over this." With that, he unhooked the car and drove off, leaving Karen seething. Later that evening, Daniel hosted an emergency meeting, this time not in secret, but right in his driveway. Over 30 neighbors showed up, all tired of Karen's overreach. "She thinks we'll back down if she scares us enough," Daniel said, addressing the crowd. "But we're stronger together. It's time we take back our neighborhood." The plan was simple: community-wide driveway protest. Everyone parked their cars in their driveways, every spot filled. For those without extra vehicles, they borrowed cars from friends and family. Some even rented cars just to make a point. By morning, Maplewood Grove looked like a car dealership. Driveways were packed, streets lined with supportive signs. "My driveway, my rule." Driveways are for cars, not Karen's. HOA means helping our area, not harassing our neighbors. Karen was furious. She marched for house to house, snapping photos, issuing violation notices, and threatening fines. But this time, no one flinched. The entire neighborhood had drawn a line, and Karen was standing on the wrong side of it. And while Karen thought she still had the upper hand, Daniel and his neighbors were already working on something that would expose her hypocrisy once and for all. The neighborhood's driveway protest had thrown Karen into a full-blown power spiral. Armed with her clipboard and a stack of pre-written violation notices, she patrolled Maplewood Grove like a self-appointed parking warden, snapping photos, jotting down license plates, and issuing threats of escalating fines. But what she didn't know was that her relentless enforcement had inspired something even more dangerous than defiance: investigation. Daniel, fueled by frustration and a growing sense of justice, teamed up with Linda and Mike to dig deeper into the HOA bylaws. They combed through dusty rulebooks, highlighted contradictory clauses, and even found obscure HOA meeting minutes from years prior. But the real breakthrough came when Linda stumbled upon something unexpected. One evening, as they gathered in Daniel's garage, Linda slapped a folder onto the workbench with a triumphant grin. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Karen's been violating her own rules." She pulled out printed photos taken from various neighborhood events and HOA newsletters, pictures of Karen's own driveway. In every photo, her car was either parked diagonally across the driveway, partially blocking the sidewalk, or worse, parked there overnight during the very time frame she claimed the new rule was in effect. But it got better. They discovered that Karen's garage was a complete disaster. It wasn't used for parking at all. It was stuffed with old furniture, storage bins, gardening tools, and piles of HOA paperwork dating back a decade. She physically couldn't park in her garage, even if she wanted to. Armed with evidence, Daniel organized one final stand, an HOA meeting the neighborhood would never forget. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Neighbors who had never attended before showed up, clutching violation notices, photos, and a simmering resentment that was ready to boil over. Karen, oblivious to what was coming, strutted to the front of the room, her clipboard resting on the podium like a badge of honor. "Let's begin," she said, her voice dripping with authority. "First order of business, driveway parking violations." Before she could continue, Daniel stood up. "Actually, Karen, I'd like to present something first." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she nodded reluctantly. Daniel walked to the front, plugging his laptop into the projector. The screen lit up with the first photo, Karen's car, parked proudly in her driveway, blocking the sidewalk. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel clicked to the next slide. Karen's garage, packed to the brim with junk, clearly unusable for parking. The room erupted. "Wait, isn't that your car, Karen?" someone shouted. "So you've been breaking your own rule," another neighbor added. "Hypocrite," someone muttered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Karen's face turned crimson. She fumbled with her clipboard, flipping pages as if searching for an escape clause. "This isn't relevant." I was preparing for a garage sale," she stammered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For 2 years? Interesting." The crowd laughed, the tension finally breaking. Stephanie, one of the HOA board members who had quietly endured Karen's reign, stood up. "I think it's clear Karen has been enforcing rules she doesn't even follow." I motioned to vote on 2 items, reversing the driveway parking ban and removing Karen as HOA president. The vote was swift and unanimous. Karen's grip on power crumbled in real time. She stood silently as hands shot up across the room, sealing her fate. When the vote ended, she gathered her clipboard, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. Without a word, she stormed out, the door slamming behind her like an exclamation mark at the end of an era. The neighborhood had won. But there was still one thing left to do. With the HOA vote finalized, Karen's reign of terror was officially over. The driveway parking ban was repealed, and the title of HOA president was passed to Stephanie, who wasted no time reassuring the neighborhood that things would return to normal. But Karen's story didn't end quietly. In the days following her public humiliation, Karen sulked in the shadows, occasionally spotted peering through her blinds as neighbors parked their cars proudly in their driveways. Gone was the clipboard, replaced by the bitter expression of someone grappling with lost control. The neighborhood, on the other hand, thrived. To celebrate their victory, Daniel, Mike, and Linda organized a massive driveway freedom festival. It wasn't just a block party. It was a symbolic middle finger to everything Karen had tried to suppress. Every driveway was packed, not just with cars, but with decorations, food stands, and lawn games. Mike's vintage Mustang gleamed proudly under the sun, surrounded by admirers. Linda set up a lemonade stand with a sign that read, "Parking and refreshment free." Even Daniel's driveway became an art piece, with chalk messages like "Home Sweet Driveway" scrawled proudly. Music blared, kids played, and the neighborhood felt more alive than ever. Of course, Karen couldn't resist making one final appearance. She emerged from her house, arms crossed, standing at the edge of her perfectly trimmed lawn like a storm cloud threatening to rain. The crowd grew quieter as they noticed her presence, waiting to see if she'd make a scene. But Karen did something unexpected. She opened her mouth to speak, then looked around, at the laughter, the smiling faces, the cars parked unapologetically in driveways, and realized she no longer had power here. No clipboard. No authority. No one cared what she thought anymore. Without saying a word, she turned around and walked back inside, closing her door softly behind her. That was the last time anyone saw her try to enforce anything in Maplewood Grove. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood continued to thrive. The driveway ban became nothing more than an inside joke. Residents even started a Karen-free zone Facebook group, sharing HOA horror stories with a mix of humor and relief. Daniel stood outside one evening, leaning against his car parked comfortably in his driveway. Mike pulled up next to him, grinning. Funny how all it took to bring the neighborhood together was one miserable woman, Mike joked. Daniel laughed. Yeah, turns out, nothing unites people like fighting for the right to park in their own driveways. And as the sun set over Maplewood Grove, the neighborhood stood as a testament to something Karen never understood. Rules might control property, but they can't control community. Not even with a clipboard. And that's how one neighborhood stood up to an over-the-top HOA Karen who thought she could control where people parked, in their own driveways. In the end, her obsession with power was no match for a united community, a few rebellious cars, and a whole lot of driveway pride. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with your own wild HOA experiences. We love hearing your stories, and your support helps us keep sharing these unbelievable tales. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's your driveway. Park proud.